with Dr. Lee Pierson, Dr. Robert Stubblefield, and Steve Richins, brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. David Berry, Professor of Musicology and Composition. Our topic of discussion is music and the subconscious. And unless Lee has some preliminaries, we're just going to turn it over to David to present our Professor Berry. And
I think I got a couple of things quick. One of them is, David, aren't you, am I right that you're a professor emeritus?
No, I'm still working. I'm an active professor.
Okay, because I was about to say that for some reason I saw somewhere that I was about to say you're way too young looking to be a professor emeritus. There's no, really can't be true.
Well, it's amazing what hair dye will do, but okay.
So now we don't go into lengthy introductions. You're a professor of musicology and composition, which is pretty nice. It's like if I were a professor, I would be like a professor of psychology and thinking, you know. But I'm not even a professor. But anyway, it's a pretty nice title. I wanted to say before we get started, I wanted to mention that Dr. Berry, Professor Berry, and his friend, colleague, Stephen Seek, who's another professor, are having a conference. Is it next October?
Yes, October 7, 8, and 9.
It's a conference on resurrecting Romanticism.
Resurrecting Romanticism, and it's at Converse University where I teach in Spartanburg.
At Converse University in wonderful Spartanburg, South Carolina. Anyway, it sounds like a fascinating conference because it's going to be new ideas and new art, particularly new music.
And you're going to be there too.
Okay, well, yes. Full disclosure, I am involved, but I have a minor role on a panel, but I intend to make the most of it. I'm going to discuss a new perspective on Ayn Rand's hypothesis of art and cognition and relate it to the theory of consciousness, probably in about 10 minutes. So there's going to be a lot. It's really sounds wonderful. It's got some nice experts in visual arts like Sandra Shaw, Diane Durante. Sandra Shaw wrote a wonderful book, Windows on the World?
Windows on the World.
On Humanity. Windows on Humanity. Windows on the World is something else. Windows on Humanity. You got Shoshana Milgram, who's very quite a wide and deep expert in literary studies. You've got Harry Binswanger in philosophy. I mean, you've got some professional musicians. It really sounds like to me there are going to be some great new ideas and great new art. Both. It's going to be a unique experience, I think.
Yeah, that's the plan.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, good. I too. That's the plan. And a lot of conferences that center around Ayn Rand's work and objectivism have art things, but they're usually kind of peripheral. They spend more time talking about politics and economics and all that kind of stuff. So we wanted to have one that was arts focused, and also I like, as you'll find out today, I like to talk about theoretical things, and a lot of conferences don't want people to go into that. They want more like music appreciation and art appreciation, things that a general audience might find nicer. But I wanted a chance for us to dig in a little bit and cause some trouble.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks a lot. Okay, so
one more comment. David, I understand that you're premiering an opera.
Well, I wrote an opera a while back that's been produced. It's an O. Henry opera, and it's from a short story of his called To Him Who Waits. What's happening differently is I originally performed it with 2 pianos. I've now orchestrated it for a 13-piece orchestra, and so this will be a premiere of the version with the orchestra accompaniment. And also Shoshana, who knows a lot about O. Henry, Shoshana Milgram, she's going to talk about the story and the background and all that kind of stuff before it. So I think that'll be fascinating too. And it's like a typical O. Henry story. It has a surprise ending. So I hope she doesn't give it away, but she might. I don't know.
She's pretty good at not.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
All right. Very good. I mean, I really am looking forward to it. So anyway, we here at the Cutting Edge, we let the guest go first, generally speaking. and talk for a while without interruption. So you can talk, you don't have to talk for a long time. You don't have to give a lecture, but you can talk. And then at some point we'll get into a discussion, and we may disagree with you, but we don't debate, we discuss. We're nice, right, Bob?
Yes, always.
So
what does Steve has to say about that? But anyway, is it Steve or Steven?
Steve.
Oh, okay.
Either or.
Either or. So fire away. You want to hear about? I'm just going to start off by, I wanted to say one other thing, which is I was just talking to Bob about this. I don't think there's anywhere in the objectivist literature where the term subconscious is actually defined. Ayn Rand gives an analogy, which I am not totally on board with, to the computer, but it's an analogy. And Dr. Pierson has a short description, but it's not really I don't think it's sufficient, and it's not a definition. So I don't think there's a definition anywhere. I have a possible candidate I may bring up a little later, but it's very tentative. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring up, I'm not sure we know exactly what we've defined our subject matter clearly. But anyway, Dr. Berry, go ahead.
Well, first, just to expand my introduction a little bit,
yeah.
I have a degree in music performance and French horn. I'll be bringing up something about that today, about music performance and talking about subconscious. And also, I was on the road for full-time touring 14 years in a rock band and almost got rich and famous. I know what it smells like. And then I've been teaching for 36 years at this university. And I teach a wide range of things. I've music history, music theory, music composition, music business, music technology. And also I teach a course on the Beatles, which is my most popular course and also the most popular course in the university. We have a small university with like 800 students, and I teach over 200 students a year the Beatles course. So the next closest thing I think is psychology.
Let it be.
Yeah, let it be. And also as a preamble, I've had it for a long time. I pulled it out again. What is Consciousness For by Dr. Lee Pierson and Monroe Trout. I started reading it in the past and kind of couldn't make sense of it. And then I started reading it again, and I say, oh yeah. So the reason this music and the subconsciousness has come up is that a friend of mine, Dr. Harry Binswanger, and his wife, Jean Maroney Binswanger, they've talked with Lee here and themselves. I've watched the cutting edge shows that you've had, that were the discussion of like perception and things like that. I've watched several episodes of that, so I'm familiar with your format. I've listened to all the arguments. I've read the arguments. I have both Gibson books. I just read bleeding chunks. I don't read from beginning to end. I have both Binswanger books. I have all the literature on the subject. Back in 1968, I saw Marianne Sturys give a series of lectures on the aesthetics of visual art. And I was in college at the time. I'd never even heard the term aesthetics until that time. Well, that was a life-changing experience for me, because the first thing it made me ask is, well, she makes a lot of sense of what makes objective and good definitions about art and how to appreciate it. And I said, I wonder, what is music? Why does anybody listen to it? Why does anybody care about it? How does it reach our emotions? And strangely enough, I pretty quickly, within 2 years, came up with an answer for that was to my satisfaction. And I've written several essays on the subject. None of them have been published, but I'm getting ready. There's a book that was supposed to come out the door 5 years ago called How Music Moves Us, The Rule of Two and Beyond. And I have to actually have this book ready for the conference, or no one will want to come and hear me talk. So, and I have there's several writings over a period of time. And the first one is my general theory of music aesthetics. And then I have one on what makes a good tonal melody. As a composer and a composition teacher, I've analyzed what makes a tune good. And I think I've done a good job with that. My students certainly write good tunes. In fact, we have a running joke when I hear something by, say, Tchaikovsky. I say Tchaikovsky went to the David Berry School of Melody, and he got a good grade. I have a chapter in there that I did on an earlier conference called Integration in Music, where I talk about that in some depth. And the rule of two is something I discovered in 2012. I've been thinking about it for many years, but it just came to me. In fact, that's an example of the subconscious being active rather than reactive, because it all of a sudden rose up and hit me in the face, and I guarantee I wasn't looking for it. So it did it of its own volition. That's quite the right word to use, but it'll have to do. But at any rate, and then I also have an essay. I started to realize I was interested in your paper, Lee, that about what the subconscious is for. You try to go into the biological and evolutionary things that would support your argument. And I just realized there are two things in music. And again, this is an aside. I'm gonna get to the point in just a moment. In music, we talk about high notes and low notes, but there's nothing inherently high or low about a note. There's, as far as the way we grasp them, there's just a faster vibration and a slower vibration. So the fact that we use those words, we attach those words to those experiences, to those perceptions, we perceive tones and musical sounds. There's got to be a reason for it. Okay, it's just no one has ever explained it to me. And then the other thing that I started, and I sort of started coming up with an evolutionary experience for it, is pleasure and pain is expressed in music mostly through consonance and dissonance. I think most of your audience will probably know what those words mean and even experientially know what those words mean. But then I decided, what makes dissonance dissonant? Because it's the same thing as high and low. It's just a particular physical phenomenon that is neurologically processed, physically processed and then neurologically processed. And, it's just something that comes into our consciousness. But it's got this label. So where'd the label come from? And I think there's an evolutionary explanation for that. But for today's topic, the thing, as I understand it, and one thing I gotta, one of the things that Dr. Pierson does to me sometimes, so I have to caution you ahead of time, I'll be going along and talking about something and he'll ask me for a definition, and then I'll give him a definition, and it's not the one he wants. And so he will start to pick it apart. But I paraphrase things a lot. And I feel like I have full conscious awareness of what I'm talking about, but I don't always, like if you ask me Ayn Rand's definition of perception and stuff, I can't quote it, I just paraphrase it. So hopefully I'll get the chance to correct anything anybody might want to jump in on, because I don't doubt what I've learned, what I've formulated, and what I know. But sometimes it's difficult to explain to other people. And so one thing that kept coming up over and over and over in many discussions and many formats was, is the subconscious active or reactive? And then, like you said, Ayn Rand, you don't know the definition of the subconscious, though she mentions it, I think, more than once. I think what we're talking about, so we can agree on it, is that there's a part of our psyche that's operating all the time, virtually all the time. It's not operating when we're unconscious, when we're knocked out. But then there's another part of our psyche that is administrative. It overrides. It kind of, whatever and we call that lower. Some people call it unconscious, but subconscious is probably a nicer word. Unconscious implies you're not aware of anything. So when we're talking about free will and things like that, we're talking about the higher level of consciousness. And then what I want to talk about a little bit today is the lower level, because if I understand correctly, Dr. Binswanger and Ms. Maroney think that the subconscious is like a computer, that our overconscious, I'll just say conscious and subconscious. Those will be the two terms I use to distinguish these two things. They think our conscious reaches in and pulls out whatever it needs, and that the subconscious itself is not actually doing anything on its own and not actually feeding, in an active way, information to us for us to apprehend. And then, as I understand it, I think, Lee, you see this distinction between the level of consciousness where free will and things reside, that kind of direct. In fact, when objectivists talk about focusing and non-focusing, they're talking about taking that upper level of consciousness and applying it to what's coming in, what's constant, the data that's always our environment, that's always part of our perception, as Gibson would say. It's all part of the one big package. And then I brought up a couple things in a discussion, and they sort of got shouted down and stuff. So I thought more and more about it. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And then one day, all the tumblers fell into place. And the whole thing made total sense to me. Even dreams, I've always wondered, what are dreams? Why do they do what they do? And now I have a reason that I believe is why they do how they act like they act, and why they do what they do, and what's going on when we have a dream. It also struck me that when someone says we don't know what consciousness is, but we know how to turn it off, that seemed to be pretty significant to me too. Like with anesthesia, or if someone's knocked unconscious or something like that. And we have no sense of time. When we dream, we have a sense of time, but when we're unconscious, they put you to sleep, and the next thing you know, there you are, you're back. And I've been in surgery a few times, so I remember that experience, or lack of experience, I should say, very well. And so the other thing is, my whole aesthetics theory is really based, it asks the question, everybody's so busy arguing about where sense of life is and all that kind of stuff, and nobody answers the fundamental question, what goes on with all these rhythms and tones that actually makes us feel something? How does a bunch of sounds all collected together and presented all of a sudden get translated into a feeling? And I actually think that is the question that needs to be answered. Then you can argue about sense of life and how you evaluate the feelings and how much you think about what you think about them. So I spend a lot of time thinking about music in perceptual terms, reading about music in perceptual terms. And is it safe with this audience to talk about the Crow epistemology, or should we define it?
I think we should assume everybody knows it.
All right. Well, the funny thing is, what I started looking into is the Crow epistemology in time perception, because music takes place in time. So what are the perceptual limits, and when does our apprehension of time? It's not by accident that a second is as long as it is, or as short as it is. I think that's all in evolution. That's when a lot of stuff goes on. So I've found several scientists who've done research, and especially with regard to art and music and the perception of time. And so I've focused on that because, and that's where I learned about the rule of two, which is a rule about repetition, which is absolutely essential in music. It has to do with our ability to perceptually grasp something happening over time, rather than to think about and analyze and come up with some complex explanation for what's going on. So basically, I wanted to mention two things that happen with music that, to me, convince me that the subconscious is actually active and not reactive. And one of them, well, first I want to say that when thinking about these little clumps of time, what is it? A guy named, his name is Ernst Poepel, P-O-P-P-E-L. He's done some research, and he has what he calls the subjective present, or now. And other people have done this. He's done some experiments and measured between 2 milliseconds and 3 seconds. Our subconsciousness is taking in all kinds of stuff, all kinds of world inner and external data all the time. But what happens, it changes frames, so to speak, like with very quickly or within 3 seconds. And it turns out there's so many things. I don't know if anybody notices it, but when you watch television and you're watching a commercial, the scene changes every 3 seconds or less, because the people who make these things know that our attention and awareness, that way they can sort of control it, because it's within the parameters of where our conscious mind doesn't pull us away from it. I was surprised to learn that Shakespeare's sonnets, each line 3 seconds long. And so I started looking into this, and I was trying to figure out, well, what in music, 3 seconds is kind of short, but I think we have managed as modern humans to extend the range. But I just picked this number. I haven't proven it yet. Upwards of 10 seconds that we can perceptually hold without the help of memory. Okay, and so the big thing that occurred to me is actually our whole conscious experience is our subconscious. It's operating all the time, including when we're sleeping and dreaming, except that it doesn't have anything guiding it when we're sleeping and dreaming. And even right now, who knows how many times you guys have stopped listening to me in the last couple seconds or couple minutes or whatever, you know? And that one of I always think of the conscious mind as the part of the brain that has evolved, as Pierson and Trout have talked about, over time, that allows us to focus. The whole discussion of focus is to take control of that subconscious being our entire experience and aiming it or sending it somewhere or controlling it. And then so the whole idea of free will has to reside there too. It's where we get to choose from all the stuff that our subconsciousness is constantly dealing with. Our subconsciousness does have some reactive qualities to it, computer-like. But the main thing, the two things in music that convince me that the subconscious actually does work and is active. The first one is, as a composer, I left a little note in the other room. When I wake up, I dream compositions. And when I wake up, and if I'm thinking about them, I can remember what I dreamed. I didn't write that. And they are not anything, I can spend a long time searching through my data bank or whatever to see if I can come up with some convoluted explanation of where that melody or that lyric came from. No, my subconsciousness presented it to me. And, one of the most famous, I don't know if many of you know this, again, me teaching the Beatles, Paul McCartney's song Yesterday. He tells everybody, he said, he woke up, it was in his head. He has a really great memory. He remembered it. So, and then he didn't have any words for it though. And he went and asked everybody he knew. He said, this has got to be a famous melody that I've just remembered somewhere. And nobody is, it is not a famous melody that he remembered. It was his melody. And so I know, and even the other night, a song actually came into me into a dream, and I woke up and I remembered the melody and the words, and I wrote them down real quickly. So that was not a conscious act. There was nothing going on for me to create that. And it's basically what we're talking about are aha or gotcha moments, and human experience and human scholarship, countless numbers, and some of them are bigger than others. When did Newton grasp gravity? It didn't come. He got to understand it and explain it over a long period of time. But there was one day when, whoa, and he wasn't looking for it. And that happens a lot. The second thing, so the composers do, your subconscious does give you new stuff. You can't create anything out of nothing, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's not the same thing. We're talking about the subconscious actually delivering you to something that it has put together on its own, unbeknownst to you. But I thought of another thing in music, and this is pretty much where I'll stop, and then we can open the discussion. and anybody can, if they want to ask me anything about anything, that's fine. But I don't know if many of you know what sight reading is. And by the way, I keep looking everywhere, but I should stare at the camera like I'm talking to you. Um, I was, don't play anymore. I was a quite accomplished French horn player. And one of the skills that many good musicians need is they have to sight read means someone puts some music in front of you that you've never seen before. And then they say, we're going to play it, go. Well, by the way, I can shout out to the UK, the London orchestras, like the London Symphony and the London Philharmonic and stuff, those are some of the best sight readers in the world. That's why John Williams actually went over and did Star Wars with them, because they saved a lot of money, because the London Symphony even sometimes plays concerts that they've never rehearsed of really complicated works. Well, of course, they're not sight reading a Mahler symphony then or something, but they played it before. But the thing is, you can put any piece of music in front of them, and if it's playable, and it's the same thing with the studio musicians in Hollywood. They don't rehearse these things. They just put it right in front of them. Well, what happens when you sight read? Yes, you have motor skills when you learn to play your instrument. Like I'm a horn player, you put your lips here, and you put your fingers there, and you put your hand there, and you breathe here and there. Yeah, all of that's kind of automated over years of practice. But when you're sight reading something unusual happens. You're looking at something totally unfamiliar. You apprehend it. Your body starts doing it while your conscious mind looks ahead. And the best sight readers, they're actually reading and planning. The conscious mind is planning the future experience while the current body and mind is playing unfamiliar music. And so that can only happen if the subconscious actually has a role in it's more. It can't be explained away with just motor skills. Something else is going on. It's much more active. And again, the better you get at sight reading, the more ahead you can look. In other words, you can expand your ability to do it. There are a great many. I've known piano players and stuff. You put a big piece of piano music in front of them they've never seen, and they just start wailing away. They're not going note, 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 note. They're taking in a whole clump of data, analyzing it, turning into body motions, doing it while they're looking at the next piece, the next part of it. And that, to my mind, that can only happen actively, and it can't happen. I can't imagine any way that it can happen reactively. So that's why, and there are other reasons, that's why I buy into the idea that the subconscious is not only active, but I think most of our experience of life is mostly our subconscious. It's why we even need to tell somebody they need to focus or not focus, because that's volitional. Whereas the stuff that the subconscious, as far as being part of our perceptual system, I'm totally on board with the Gibson stuff, the idea that the environment and the organism are all one of the same thing. You know, they're not, it's not two different things. One isn't out there and the other one in here. It's all part of one thing. But I think that that's what life is our subconscious, and that we're in that subjective, where it's a subjective present or now all the time that we're conscious, we're dreaming. And then the conscious mind is I like to think of it as having executive privileges. And the other thing, you even see it with young kids, don't have very good executive privileges. It takes a while. You have to learn, and develop that skill. And some people extend it further than others too. You make it more powerful. So that's basically, that's my sermon. I'm gonna take a little.
Very nice. Who wants to go first and raising some questions?
Well, I know you have.
Well, let me get this super chat. Let me get this super.
Okay, let's do that.
Let me get a super chat out of the way.
Let's do that.
Not out of the way, but thank Robert Naser for $2.
Robert. Okay.
He said, I'm a well, he just did another one. So we got two by Robert. So thank you, Robert. As a rock and roller, I'll do my best to keep up. This is Robert, who has a show on the Ayn Rand Center UK called Living on Earth, which is very charismatic. Robert is electric on that show.
Actually, I've watched.
we love it.
I watched a couple and I enjoyed them too. Yes.
And then we have a second one from Robert.
And he plays electric guitar too.
And
He says, truth. And my biggest weakness as a musician, I'm a conscious player and I analyze while I'm playing. Take a lot of practice to automatize skills. It takes a lot, I think, it takes a lot of practice to automatize skills.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, and that's the essence of skill, is that you've got some significant aspects of what you're doing automatized effectively enough that you can turn that over to automatic processes and therefore consciously focus on, as Dr. Berry was saying, in the case of sight reading, he said you look ahead. You wouldn't be able to look ahead if you didn't have the current stuff automatized well.
Except that automatization that's taking place in sight reading is not fully automatized. It's actually fully functioning as if you were consciously paying attention to what you were doing.
Okay, so you're
nothing automatic about it. I mean, there are automatic components of it, but the actual activity is not automatic.
Yeah, that's worth looking into a little more. So you distinguished what I thought you distinguished anyway between, and I can't relate to this too well because in my experience playing the ill woodwind that nobody blows good, I was a clarinetist, but I was not anywhere, I'm not in his class. I'm not close to the, so I could sort of sight read, but it was, I couldn't even play the instrument that well. It's hard to get a tone out of a clarinet. And anyway, be that as it may, I can sort of understand what you're talking about, but not completely. But if you distinguished the kind of part where you're the production of the moment, where you're playing the notes at that moment, and then there's the looking ahead part. And I thought that was more or less conscious versus subconscious, because the immediate playing is pretty highly automatized. But you're saying
pushing the automatized, I think, is overstating the case. There is something else going on there, because it's acting as if you were consciously. It's doing the things that you would, like you just described yourself, you would consciously do, but you need to tell your body, go do those things. I've got other things to attend to. And the body it's never played the music before, so it's not falling into any kind of routines from the music. That's all a new experience that's happening simultaneously while you're looking ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, but when things get automatized, and this is not restricted to music, as a general principle, the more highly automatized something is, the less consciousness you have of the details of the activity. The more that there's a effective automatization, the more you can turn your mind onto something else entirely and yet perform that activity. Now, do things ever become totally automatic? No, I guess I would say no, because you always have to have some ability to adjust to something that's a little different than what you've automatized to. So that things change. So it can't be 100%, but that's the general pattern, is that consciousness recedes. This was known to the Würzburg psychologists, more than 100 years ago.
Is that the Gestalt people?
No, this is before the Gestalts. Just before the Gestalt people, they talked about automatization. They used that term, whatever it is in German, and they were aware of the recession of awareness. That was the phrase used by, I think it was Narcisse Bach, if anybody cares. Probably not, but anyway, this was known back then. In fact, it was known also, for that matter, was known also to my favorite psychologist, William James, who has a chapter on habit, and that you turn over everything you can to habit, and if you work on that, you will wake up some morning and you will be one of the premier skilled people of your generation if you can turn over to habit as much as possible. But of course, it's not 100%.
Well, that's not sight reading either, because you're not doing.
Okay.
You are doing habitual things, but you're also you're doing in the moment conscious,
I understand that.
non-habitual things. Things.
But the response to the note on the page, presumably you've practiced enough that as soon as you see that note, you got your fingers in the right place and your mouth's doing the right thing, and you don't think too much about that note by note.
But what I am thinking about is not that. I mean, my first glance, it's that, and then at that point, it stops being that, and there's a part of my brain that actually executes the performance, and it's not. It's only partly explainable by automation.
Okay.
It seems like as if I was reading it note for note, consciously paying attention, like you were talking about when you were having trouble playing clarinet. It's that same conscious experience, except it's happening simultaneously with a separate conscious experience.
This is tricky.
Yeah, and
so
let me
go
add
back.
one more thing, because Steve pointed this out to me. He said, when somebody learns a play, an actor learns a play, or a music performer does a piece by memory, you count all that stuff in. But one of the things all we performers know is you go on automatic pilot, you let your subconscious, and you supposedly automatize that stuff, but your conscious mind can get in the way and screw it up. And one of the things that happens to an actor in a play, and also happens to a musician playing a concerto from memory, you got to tell your conscious mind, stay away. You're not allowed in that room, because if you do, you're going to make something go bad. You're going to break it up.
I've done this before, but would you like to hear me do it again? Recite the Centipede poem, Dr. Barry?
I want to hear that. Yeah.
It's brief. I've done it before, but I'm going to do it again because you've inspired me. The centipede was happy quite until the toad for fun said, "Pray, which leg comes after which?" This raised her mind to such a pitch, she lay distracted in the ditch, considering how to run. So the centipede was walking along, and the toad said, "How do you do that?" And the centipede started paying attention to the little details and flipped over.
Yep.
So this is a well-known idea that you should not interfere with a well-automatized sequence of activity when you got it well on. But if you don't have it well automatized, you have to interfere. And in fact, you could also develop this. I don't know about in music, but I developed some skill in things like shooting and basketball, of being able to pay attention to it consciously while exercising the automatized activity. That itself is a skill. It's a kind of introspective skill, and you can develop it. But I still wouldn't do it in the middle of the game, because the guy's going to come by and steal the ball from you. And if I were a good performer in music, I wouldn't do it in music either. I wouldn't. Right. I wouldn't try to do that.
Even then, that describes part of the experience, but it falls short. If you describe the subconscious as capable of being active like the conscious mind, then there's nothing to explain. It makes sense.
Okay.
It's all when right. You try to reduce the subconsciousness, its power, its ability, its abilities. Okay. All of a sudden, then you have to explain these things away.
That brings me back to my first question, which you could say is one of these definitional things, but at least let's call it a description. What's meant by, in your usage, what is meant by? I don't mean a formal definition necessarily, but what is meant by active and reactive? What's the distinction there in your mind?
In my mind, active means choices are being made rather than just accepting, something that's been brought up by the conscious mind. In other words, the subconscious is actually acting like the conscious mind. It's doing the same kind of thing, but at a lower level. That's what I mean by that.
Well, I was with you, sort of, with the choice. But I lost it with the later part, because let me frame the question this way.
Okay.
Does the subconscious, in your view, have a faculty of volition? It's a tough one, huh?
Well, yeah. My first thought was, let me think about that. Then my second thought was,
well, we allow thinking here, don't we?
Maybe I did already think about it. But my first answer is yes, because I'm thinking there's not a huge division between consciousness and subconsciousness. It's a continuum. and that even when you say it evolved, you suggested it evolved, from other, animals and stuff like that. I think they share a lot. I think they share a lot in common, and so I would be inclined to think, yeah, it has. I think the birth of the conscious mind comes out of things the subconscious mind does, and that's why I think the subconscious mind is active.
Well, here for me at least, we have a line of demarcation, because I really disagree with that. That is, I would say that first of all, the word subconscious, which I have tried to argue is not a good word, but I don't seem to succeed with that, so I'm kind of giving up on that. But it does suggest this kind of continuum. There's something sort of below, and there's some kind of line, and it's a continuum. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's stuff that's conscious. Now, the continuum is within consciousness. There is a continuum from the focus of consciousness to the fringe. It's a very important distinction.
And you talk about fringe, like peripheral vision, stuff like that.
Yeah. The fringe is very important. It's not particularly a concept in objectivism, but I think it's crucial in understanding consciousness and volition. It's really important, and it's in William James. Anyway, there we have a sort of continuum from the focus to the fringe. But then when you get to subconscious, it's like, in my view, it's like night and day. Well, night and day is a continuum. So it's not like night and day, I guess. I mean, things can be as different in night and day and still be a continuum, but this is not a continuum. For me, subconscious means it's not conscious. If it's conscious, it's part of the fringe of awareness. And I think only
the fringe has, what would be the point of having an idea of subconscious without the fringe included? I don't get that.
Oh, the fringe is it's very important. The fringe.
No, how can you talk about a fringe that isn't connected to the subconscious?
It's conscious. It's material that you are less conscious of. You said a good example. You gave a good example, which is peripheral vision. You have some awareness, but it's not as sharp because the
well, I know, but the subjective present.
The density of cones.
Everything is coming. Anyway, everything that can come in is coming in the subjective present or the now, in these 3-second clumps. Everything, and so everything peripheral is part of that too, and it's actually our conscious mind that chooses to pick out things to attend to.
That's right, but that's all in consciousness. All of that is conscious.
I think you're trying to separate something. See, you tried to ask me if I thought volition, and I think volition belongs to the conscious mind, but you asked me, is any of it in the subconscious mind? And what I'm trying to think, I see these things, they blur together. The peripheral to me is part of that area of where the subconscious, it's like, what do they call brackish water? It's where the two aspects.
This is where definitions actually do matter in this kind of thing.
Oh, well, I know, but we're trying to establish one.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do here. Is I'm trying to say, with the stuff in the fringe of consciousness is conscious. It's not subconscious. Subconscious is what we're not aware of, but is there and is available to consciousness. It's not in consciousness, but it's available. We can get it.
I like my idea.
By that, on that idea, I would not say there's any volition in the subconscious at all.
I like my idea of subconscious, which is basically everything that's actually going on right this moment in our minds. Our whole experience as we proceed through life. That's what's actually happening, and then we have this faculty that can override, examine, put stuff in. By the way, we might want to get there. I've been thinking about integration, and I'm pretty much convinced integration is solely the act of the subconscious, and that all the conscious mind does is like present a bunch of stuff to it, and until the subconscious actually integrates it, it's not part of our knowledge.
I kind of agree with you, except that I go further than that. In my view, although again, I think we'd have to still need to work on this thing about subconscious, because I don't think you're making a sufficient distinction between conscious and subconscious. But leaving that aside just for the moment about this point about integration, in my view, and I'm pretty radical about this, consciousness is management. That's what it is. It's not labor. The rough thing is consciousness management, subconscious labor. So in that sense, all of the actual direct work is subconscious. Now, some people get confused about this and think, well, how can you say that? Or doesn't the manager do work? Yes, the manager does work. The manager is crucial. Consciousness is crucial, but it's not there on the assembly line putting stuff together or whatever it is that's being done neurophysiologically. All of that is done, in my view, by the brain. And consciousness is, in my view, purely management. I didn't get that from introspection, that basically the way it works as a rough approximation is we consciously ask questions and subconsciously answer them in terms of what thought processes are. So the actual process, whether it's integration or anything else, and I don't think integration is the only process, but whatever it is, that's I think it's neural. It's the brain doing it. Bob's going to jump in here at any moment now. So I agree with you, but except I'm going a little further. I want to just say one other quick thing. I said roughly, we consciously ask questions and stuff. That's a rough description because the content of what we ask questions about consciously has to be given to us from subconscious processes. And that's why the fringe and focus is so important to understand clearly, is that you cannot grab something as a conscious person, you cannot grab something out of the subconscious. That's what you're not conscious of. You can grab it out of the fringe and put it in the focus. That's how consciousness works.
I got that, but the
you are somewhat at any particular moment, you are somewhat at the mercy of what the subconscious gives you. Now, over time, you can get more and more stuff, but at any given moment, if it's not in the fringe or focus, you cannot grab onto it by conscious volition.
But what I'm trying to tell you, and the reason I think the subconscious is active, is that the subconscious can present you with an answer to a question you didn't ask. In other words, because it's operating in the back, it's building things, it's putting things together. It's, you have to at some point think about it, but that's where the aha moment comes. It makes connections that you're not making, and all of a sudden it says, here it is. It hands it like the song that, any kind of musical idea. I'm starting to write a theme or start to write a song or whatever. All of a sudden, something shows up in my brain, and I wasn't asking for it, and it came from I don't know where. And I think because the subconscious is actually working too, and so that may not be volition, but it's something very much like it. It's a
I don't think it's like volition at all. It's not volition at all. I don't think it has. I think the subconscious, what we call the subconscious, which is to me the brain, or not the brain as a totality, but it's certain neural processes and states.
Right. This is so important to me. But by the way, this is so important to me because music. Our response to music comes directly from a perception of the things that are in music, from perceptions that are in it, and we respond to them. And that's why it feels like it bypasses the conscious mind altogether. You can engage the conscious mind in the apprehension and enjoyment of music, but I think 90% of it is a dialogue between the thing happening out there by the musicians and the subconscious mind dealing with it. And again, that sounds like an active process to me. And that's the main thing I want. Where exactly the nature of some subconscious, the thing I'm just challenging is I don't think it's a passive
I think I agree with you there, but not on the volition thing necessarily. And I do have
I'm not brought into that. You surprised me with it, and I don't know.
Okay.
And Bob, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I got one other quick thing though I wanted to say. I have a somewhat different explanation of the musical experience than rooting it through perception. But I don't want to give that now because I'm going to do that in October. So I don't want to give away too much.
Well, fortunately, I think I get ahead of you, so I'll preempt you, so that'll be good. But anyway,
I want to do that. I want you to go first there. That's what I want. Okay, Bob, you must want. I know Bob was.
You gave two separate types of evidence for your theory that the subconscious is not reactive. Let me go to the second one, that is the sight reading example first.
Okay.
and see if that can be explained by a reactive subconscious. That is, consciously you're looking ahead and seeing what automated procedures you want to enact. And then they get enacted and you can keep looking ahead. That is, you haven't automated playing these particular notes together in that particular thing, but you have automated when I see these signs, maybe it's this few milliseconds worth of stuff, that's going to happen automatically afterwards. So your consciousness is really setting out the plan for what your subconscious will do a few seconds later.
That sounds sensible, except there's something just about the fact, you can say things like, we don't think about walking, we know how to walk and stuff. This is so much on a much higher conceptual level than walking. And so consequently, it just does not, it's because when I'm doing this, part of my brain is literally takes over my body and makes a whole boatload of conscious decisions. Push this here, do that, blow that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all of those things are part of a repertoire. But the fact that it's putting them in that certain order, something actually has got to be driving the bus because it's a combination, a specific newly discovered combination of automatized things, as you say. And the point I'm making is the conscious mind that's looking ahead is not driving the bus.
No.
Oh, but it is driving the
right
bus.
direction.
It is driving the bus.
That again? No, I got Bob. What'd you say?
Yeah. At the time, your conscious mind is not telling you to push this button, blow with this amount of force, and hold it for this long.
Yeah.
But a few seconds ahead of time, it was telling it was instructing you, it was setting triggers to say, these are the things that your body has to do. You've automated doing those, do those. And in the meantime, I'm going to look ahead and tell you what you should be doing after that.
That's when you describe it that way, that sort of makes sense, but it's also doesn't, it's, I hate to say this, but it's not what it feels like. I mean, that's apparently going on. There's no question about that. But there's also, again, the idea that if you're just pulling things out of a data, if you're just pulling things off the hard drive isn't actually solving the problems. But in this case, this hard drive is solving the problems based on stuff. It's working independently of, it's solving problems independently of what.
You got two things there. You got solving the problems and working independently, and those are not the same thing. I kind of agree with the solving the problems part, that it's not just a hard drive, but not the working independently. The signature of conscious volition in consciousness is the feeling of mental effort. And surely you have that feeling when you're performing music. You have the feeling of exerting some kind of effort in it, at least at some level. And sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less.
Say that one
but
more time.
In other words, there's some conscious management involved all the time. Some amount, a little bit at least. Even in the most highly automatized thing, you have some conscious managerial. Otherwise, what happens is, and I think this happens with any automatized activity, if there is no conscious management, it fairly quickly goes off track. So maybe you can do a few steps. So I doubt, for example, that you composed an entire opera while you were sleeping. You may have gotten some themes, little bits and pieces, a few steps, but you go beyond a few steps. If it's not managed, it becomes, jumbled up and messed up. So I believe when people say that they solved a big difficult problem by sleeping, in their sleep, which I've heard. I mean, that's often said. I think what that usually is, now I'm not certain here, is they're working on it and there's last one or two pieces that they didn't get. So they said, the hell with it, I'm going to sleep. And they got that last little piece and that made things fit. Not that they did some entire long process subconsciously without conscious involvement. That's what I don't believe in, I think.
So Lee, I think you've gone to the other thing. I wanted to focus on the sight reading thing first.
Okay. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
Well,
You got 2 minutes. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
So David, you've said that it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
Does it feel that way when you decide to walk?
When I decide to walk, that's automated. I mean, the decision where to walk and all that and what speed and all that, well, but the automatized movement of walking, no, I'm not, my subconscious doesn't feel the same way when I'm walking. Lee just sort of slipped in there. I don't know if he noticed it. He said he used the word management about the subconscious, and he also used
I
the
meant
word
consciously.
well, you said management, and then you said the subconscious has some management in it, and then you say, consciousness is management. That's what I'm saying. I think there may be a little sliver of something sitting down in subconsciousness that actually gave rise evolutionarily to our much more developed and much bigger skill, ability, whatever you want to call it, attribute. I don't think
my point is that aspect of management might not be volitional. It might have been programmed.
Well, again, when I said doesn't feel like it, and you were trying to talk about walking compared to that, well, no, it's not. Walking, even though it involves a certain amount of complexity, it's nothing. They're not. It's not the same experience. I mean, it shares similarities because you're right. You have to put your lips a certain way, and you have to breathe a certain way, and you have to put down the right fingers. And there are a lot of automatized things that you've done many times before. But when you're sight reading and playing something you're sight reading, you are giving up your subconscious to let it act as if it were conscious. In other words, it's like reading the music and doing all the physical things you're supposed to do while you're attending to something else. And you're looking ahead. I agree with you that part of the looking ahead is, trying to figure out what that repertoire is, but the actual performance in real time of the repertoire doesn't sound reactionary. It has a very active feeling about it, a very, like it's controlling something while you're controlling something else.
Well, notice the difference of what your consciousness does when you're walking, doing an automated thing, versus what it has to do when you're sight reading.
Okay.
You can really free your conscious to do totally different things while you're walking. Of course, if you stumble, then you have to go back. But
exactly, yeah.
And on the other hand, when you're sight reading, you cannot allow your consciousness to go and do anything. It's got to be doing something precise. It has to be looking ahead and programming what you're going to pull up automatically in a millisecond or two later.
Except that, we talk about focus and non-focus. A lot of times your conscious mind can just not be doing anything. And you keep walking because, you're doing.
That's right. And that's the difference between that and sight reading. You can't let your conscious mind do something else while you're sight reading.
Well, that's true, but don't you think somehow that that's a significant difference? In other words, are we talking about something that has a certain?
It's significant. It's why, for example, when people go out driving and they're going to some new destination, and if they're not careful, and that is they exert conscious management, they may end up at work instead because they go the automatized path. There's some fork in the road.
But still, to drive that car and go that direction, drive that car and go that direction, your subconscious is actually acting like it was conscious. It's making all those decisions.
I wouldn't put it that way myself. I think they're totally different functions.
Yeah,
it's management and labor, and those are absolutely different functions. and that and furthermore, here's why. Let me just make this one more point.
Okay.
I'll let you have the last word. But volition is necessarily a phenomenon of consciousness because, and this is because consciousness is a non-material existence and can have volition. Physical stuff cannot have volition. It's inherent in the properties of matter as described by the laws of physics that you don't have, they can't be volitional. So it's to me, it's absolutely dichotomous in that respect. Okay, David, you're up. And we're going to go to Clubhouse pretty soon. Okay. But go ahead.
So it's Clubhouse time now, or did I want
go
to
ahead? Go ahead.
One little thing because it keeps coming up, the assembly line and management, and the simple fact of and I thought about this, and I have a very clear picture in my mind. You have a bunch of conscious people on the assembly line. And so you can have someone in the assembly line all of a sudden find, well, if I do this in this order, that's going to work a lot better. He didn't ask the manager. He didn't explain it to anybody. And then all of a sudden one day the manager notices Bob's station is going twice as fast as Harry's, or something. What happened there? It's a case of the person on the assembly line actually doing something active management, but unrecognized by the manager, you see. And I think that's what
I don't believe that. I don't believe it. I think that's where this is an analogy, and the analogy breaks down there, and also at the top it breaks down with it. Well, right. I'm sorry. I should let you have the absolute last word, David, and then we go over to or Stifle. We'll go over to Clubhouse and keep working. But go ahead.
Show me no last thing. I think I laid it out. I've heard some interesting objections and observations, and I think the last thing I'll say is whatever we're disagreeing about, we maybe because we don't agree on a definition of the subconscious, and that might be the sticking point after all is said and done.
Might be. I never gave that I'm going to quickly give my very tentative. I didn't. Mine is that subconscious is the states and processes that are causally proximate to consciousness, in either direction. It comes from consciousness or to consciousness. And then my scientifically advanced definition, beyond the primitive one, is this: they're the neural states and processes that are causally proximate to consciousness, that cause conscious experience and directly receive volitional causation. That's the best I can do at this time. It's probably not exactly. It probably needs tuning.
So you got the last word anyway. So that's how do we get to the Clubhouse?
Okay.
Let me.
Steve.
Let me take it from here. We got a super chat from Kathleen. Thank you, Kathleen. She has no comment. No comment, but just a thank you to Kathleen. And I would like to do a summary and what gave rise to this whole idea of the subconscious. I'm trying to be brief because I know we got to go. On HBL in about 2014, the idea of subconscious was brought up and it was argued over for a while. And there's three views. There's the active and the reactive and the passive. And Ayn Rand in philosophy, who needs it, and other places, holds up the active view in conscious in the
subconscious.
Conscious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so Lee, maybe you'll talk about this in Clubhouse, but is your view the passive view? Because
no.
Harry and Jean is reactive, David is active. Okay, and so there's a lot of key concepts here, folks. And so Lee's going to be emphasizing what key concepts are included in this whole thing. So if you come over to Clubhouse, we'll have a great discussion there. And I'd like to thank Professor Barry for coming, and I hope he'll come back. And everybody, Goodbye for now.